Hello and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to look at gaseous exchange in the higher multicellular plants. In these multicellular plants, there are specialized structures or organs or parts of the plant body that are adapted to carry out gaseous exchange. The main areas or structures for gaseous exchange are: 1. The leaf through the stomata, in the stem through the epidermis and lenticels, and also the roots through the epidermis, and in some plants that grow in waterlogged soils, there are specialized breathing roots known as pneumatophores. In this lesson, we look at the structure of the leaf in relation to gaseous exchange. Now, externally, the leaf has broad lamina that provides a large surface area for gaseous exchange. In many plants, the lamina is broad to provide a large surface area for gaseous exchange. Now, if you look at the internal structure, you see there are several features that enhance this process of gaseous exchange. Now, the most important and prominent is the presence of the tiny pores known as stomata, singular stoma. These are tiny pores through which gases enter and leave the leaf. The internal structure, if you look at the spongy mesophyll tissue, there are air spaces. There are air spaces. These air spaces enhance diffusion and also exposes large cell surfaces for gaseous exchange. So the larger the air spaces, the more the exposure of the cells to air for diffusion to occur. And also, the larger the air spaces, the faster the rate of diffusion, since the rate of diffusion is fastest through a gaseous medium. And also you can see that the epidermis, both lower and upper, are just one cell thick, and this also does promote gaseous exchange. Now, the surfaces of these mesophyll cells, both palisade mesophyll and spongy mesophyll, are moist. The moist surface enhances diffusion in that gases diffuse in solution form. And also, the walls of these mesophyll cells are relatively thin for faster diffusion of gases into and out of the cells. Now, we look at the structure and function of the stomata. Structure and function of the stomata. Stomata is plural. Singular is stoma. We talk about one stoma. Now, stomata are tiny openings on the leaf surface that are bordered or surrounded by specialized or modified guard cells. Guard cells are modified epidermal cells, and they are structured and adapted to create the stoma, and they also control its opening and closing. Now, the adaptations of the guard cells, what is the modification, are that: 1, unlike other epidermal cells, they have chloroplast, so that means they can carry out photosynthesis. 2, the shape. This bean-shaped or sausage-shaped ensures that in between the two guard cells there is a pore known as the stoma. So the unusual bean shape of these gut cells is important in the creation of the stoma. And thirdly, if you look at the walls, the inner wall and the outer, they have different thickness. This difference in thickness ensures that when these cells do become turgid, then they tend to bulge outward, away from each other, and in the process creating the stoma. And of course, like many cells, the gut cells also do have a subvacuole. The subvacuole is important in creating an osmotic pressure that facilitates the inflow of water by osmosis, and also the subvacuole is important in making the cells turgid. And as they become turgid, they bulge outward, thereby opening the stoma. So, gut cells are modified epidermal cells, and their modifications enable them to control the opening and closing of the stomata. Now, how does the opening and closing of stomata come about? Now, the process of opening and closing of stomata has been explained using various theories. Now, we look at three commonest theories that are used to explain the mechanism of opening and closing. The first of such theory is photosynthetic theory. Now, in all the theories, the principle is about change of turgidity of the gut cells. When the gut cells become turgid, they bulge outward and the stoma opens. When they become flaccid, they tend to move close together and the stoma closes. That is the principle that underlies all these theories that explain the mechanism of opening and closing. So what varies from one to the other is the factors that change the osmotic pressure in the gut cells to bring about osmosis. Now, in photosynthetic theory, it's based on the fact that gut cells do have chloroplast, and so there is sugar formation in the gut cells. The formation of sugar through photosynthesis during the day raises the osmotic pressure in the gut cells. And as a result, water is drawn from the surrounding epidermal cells by osmosis. The gut cells become turgid and bulge outward, making the stomata to open. At night, however, there is no photosynthesis and there is no sugar formation, and the little that is there is converted to starch, which accumulates in the gut cells. Now, starch is not osmotically active, so the osmotic pressure of the gut cells falls. Consequently, these gut cells, because of their low osmotic pressure, they lose water by osmosis to the surrounding epidermal cells. They become flaccid and draw towards one another, leading to the closure of the stomata. However, one setback in this theory is that there are some plants whose stomata open at night when there is no light and close by daytime when light is present. So there must be other processes that are involved in the opening and closing of the stomata. But in the vast majority of plants, this photosynthetic theory seems to apply. The second theory in explaining the mechanism is sugar to starch interconversion. This theory presupposes that depending on the conditions within the gut cells, sugar may be converted into starch or starch into sugar, depending on the pH. So this starch to sugar interconversion theory is under the influence of pH. And then the pH controls the enzyme controlled reactions. So during the day, when photosynthesis is taking place, gut cells use up carbon dioxide. As a result, the pH in the gut cells tends to rise, because during the day, when CO2 is used up, then the pH will rise, because remember, CO2 reacts with water to form carbonic acid. This carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ions and hydrogen carbonate ions. So a process that will consume CO2, like photosynthesis, will make the process to proceed in the reverse direction. So there'll be less and less hydrogen ions. There'll be less and less hydrogen ions because CO2 is being consumed by photosynthesis. So with a drop of hydrogen ions, the pH is said to rise, because the higher the concentration of hydrogen ions, the lower the pH. The lower the concentration of hydrogen ions, the higher the pH. So during the day, the pH is high because of the low concentration of hydrogen ions. The high pH favors the enzymatic conversion of starch into sugars. The sugars, being osmotically active, will raise osmotic pressure in the gut cells. Consequently, water from the surrounding epidermal cells is drawn into the gut cells. The gut cells become turgid and the stoma opens. At night, the reverse of this process takes place. There is no photosynthesis, but the plant's tissues carry out respiration. Respiration releases CO2. Accumulation of CO2 leads to an accumulation of hydrogen ions, and this lowers the pH. As a result of the low pH, conversion of sugar to starch is favored. So sugar is converted into starch, and when the pH is low, starch being osmotically inactive will lower the osmotic pressure of the gut cells, and as a consequence, water is drawn from the gut cells to the surrounding epidermal cells. The gut cells become flaccid. They draw close toward one another, leading to closure of the stomata. That is at night. So at night, there's accumulation of CO2, leading to low pH. The low pH favors a conversion of sugar to starch. The osmotic pressure of the gut cells drops. As a result, the gut cells lose water to the surrounding epidermal cells by osmosis, and they become flaccid, thereby closing the stoma. Now, the third theory is about the potassium ion theory. The potassium ion theory. This theory presupposes that during the day, light provides energy that is used to actively pump potassium ions into the gut cells. So during the day, in the presence of light, so here is in the presence of light, so daytime, light provides energy that is used to actively pump potassium ions into the gut cells. The potassium ions raise the osmotic pressure of the gut cells. Water is then drawn into the gut cells by osmosis. The gut cells become turgid and bulge outward, thereby opening the stomach. At night, there is no light, there is no energy for the active pumping of potassium ions into the guard cells, and instead the potassium ions diffuse out of the guard cells. Because remember, they had accumulated in the guard cells during the day through active process. Now at night, in the absence of energy, there is diffusion down a concentration gradient. So with the outflow of potassium ions, the osmotic pressure of the guard cells will drop, resulting in loss of water by osmosis to the surrounding epidermal cells. The guard cells become flaccid, they draw toward one another, leading to the closure of stomata. So those three theories are used to explain how guard cells do bring about the opening and closing of stomata. Remember, basically what happens in the guard cells is a change in osmotic pressure. With a change in osmotic pressure, there's going to be osmosis, making the guard cells either to be turgid, thereby opening the stomata, or they become flaccid, thereby closing the stomata. So what varies in each of the three theories is the cause of the change in osmotic pressure. But the underlying principle in all the three is change in osmotic pressure, and the following change in turgidity of the guard cells. Now, stomata, as we mentioned, is one of the most important structures in the plant when it comes to gaseous exchange. And also it is through the stomata that the internal structures of the plant, in particular the leaf, are exposed to the atmosphere. So the structure, size and distribution of the stomata in a plant is closely related to the natural habitat of the plant. For example, plants that grow in dry areas. Such plants are known as xerophytes, tend to have few stomata, smaller stomata, which are mainly located on the lower epidermis where they are shielded from direct sunlight. And in some plants, you find that the stomata are sunken. This is to shield them again from direct elements of the environment, such as wind. So these features help to reduce water loss through the stomata. These modifications help in water conservation in such plants because they live in environments that are dry. Likewise, plants that grow in well-watered places, in fact, in areas that are freshwater habitats. Such plants are known as hydrophytes, and their problem is presence of excess water in their body. So they tend to have many stomata, which are mainly on the upper epidermis that is exposed to the environment. And the stomata can also be large. So you have many stomata, mainly on the upper leaf surface, and the stomata tend to be large. Now, these features help to get rid, it helps the hydrophytes release excess water to the atmosphere. Because in the environment, the problem is too much water. So they must have modifications in their stomata to get rid of excess water. So in the leaf, the stomata are the main avenues through which gaseous exchange takes place. So you look at the structure of the leaf, and you see how the two main gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, get into and out of the plant. Now, during the day, photosynthesis is the main process that is taking place in the leaf. So carbon dioxide diffuses from the atmosphere and into the leaf. There is a diffusion gradient. See, for gaseous exchange to take place, there must be a diffusion gradient. So that means in the atmosphere, there's a higher concentration of carbon dioxide. So the gas diffuses in to to the leaf through the open stoma, dissolves in the moisture on the surface of the mesophyll cells, and then diffuses into the cells where it is used in photosynthesis. That is during the day or in the presence of light when photosynthesis is taking place. As a result of photosynthesis, oxygen will be released. Oxygen is a byproduct of respiration. Now, some of the oxygen is used in respiration by the plant cells, but the rest diffuses out into the atmosphere through the stoma. So there will be photosynthesis taking place, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. So once again, there is a concentration gradient. The concentration of oxygen inside the leaf is higher than the concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere. So oxygen diffuses out. Just like carbon dioxide has a higher concentration in the atmosphere than in the inside of the leaf, because inside the leaf, the carbon dioxide is being consumed in photosynthesis. So there is always a deficit. And that's how the concentration gradient is established and maintained. So CO2 diffuses into the plant, while oxygen will be diffusing out of the plant through the stomata. Now at night, there's no photosynthesis, and it's only respiration that takes place. So oxygen in the atmosphere is at a higher concentration than in the leaf. So you find that at night, when there's no photosynthesis, then oxygen will be diffusing into the plant through the stoma, the partially open stoma. Now, since respiration is taking place, carbon dioxide will diffuse out since the concentration in the leaf is higher than the concentration in the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide diffuses out of the plant through the stoma. Now usually it's not just through the stomata that these gases pass. Even through the epidermis, some gases will diffuse through the epidermis. But most of the gases diffuse into and out of the plant through the stoma. But even do have epidermal gases exchange, just like you also have the cuticular gases exchange. But the main structure that allows gases to move into and out of the leaf are the stomata. But inevitably, some of the gases will pass through the epidermis.